Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, some apologies from Shri. I know a lot of you are here probably expecting her to do an amazing talk. She's unfortunately unwell, so wasn't able to make it today. Understand it was slightly contagious, so she's doing a bit for public health at the moment. So thank her on your behalf. But we have got some amazing speakers here today, and hopefully, because we've got a bit more time, we're going to have a bit more time for a Q&A. I know all of you here, we're going to have get a lot out of the session today. We're going to be looking in particular at bipolar specialist care pathways and the need for it. I'm sure we're really passionate about what we do. We've got a great combination of lived experience. We've got good clinical expertise as well. And we're going to bring a really important patient organisation perspective as well. And we know that at some point, specialist services for bipolar are going to happen for the NHS. So you here are the forward-thinking people who are the smart people who have come to be here on the vanguard to make it happen in your trust and so forth. So a big thank you and a big congratulations to yourself. We've also got some really amazing presentations from some other charities as well who are here today. And Talking Rob, who's on the stage, is going to be talking about a sensory space. So a little bit about my background. My name's Simon Kitchen. I'm the Chief Exec of Bipolar UK. I've been Chief Exec for just over 6 years now. I'm not a doctor. I'm not someone who's living with bipolar. But the advantage I've got is I've got a very varied career background. I started off working in regeneration, doing a lot of anti-poverty initiatives, trying to turn around lots of very poor areas in the country. I then worked at the Sustainable Development Commission, where I did a lot of work trying to deal with some very complex social, environmental and economic problems. And then I also worked at the Alzheimer's Society, where I led an initiative called the Dementia Action Alliance, where we're signing up lots of organisations to help people with dementia. I also worked, finally, at Leonard Cheshire Disability, where I led a huge co-production initiative with thousands of people with really severe and enduring physical conditions. And I was really shocked when I came to Bipolar UK, when I took on the job at Bipolar UK, that there was this group of people. There's well over 1 million people living with bipolar in the UK. A group of people who you give them a little bit of support, a little bit of knowledge, a bit of medication, and they could go from people who were really struggling, who were using lots of mental health services, and they were able to go on to live amazing lives, who were able to be working as doctors in the NHS, as nurses, architects, lawyers, working in shops. All the things that people take for granted in their lives, they're able to do if they just got that little bit of help and support. And I was astonished that even though other parts of the economy, other parts of society, lots of people living with physical conditions, they're able to get these really quite complex care pathways signed off for themselves, that it was almost impossible for people with bipolar to get that basic care and support. So it made me really passionate about what I'm doing, because I know this is a problem. It's not a knotty problem. This is not a difficult problem to solve as a society. This is a problem that is being solved for a large group of people already who are living with bipolar. And some parts of the NHS do work for them. But I know if we can get that care out to absolutely everyone, it is by far and away the most cost-effective way of being able to support this amazing group in society. So hopefully you'll be able to come away with some inspiration with your services in your area. And perhaps you are some of the amazing doctors and nurses and clinical psychologists and people living with bipolar who are already delivering that within your service. We know it's a big uphill struggle to do this, but we think within 5 years, we think we can fix this problem. We hope that many of you in this room here today will be part of that. I bet a few of you are kind of wondering what bipolar is as well, and that's absolutely fine, because we're all starting from a different level of knowledge. So we use this is a tool, very crude tool, that was developed by people living with bipolar. We call it the mood scale. And it's a way that we describe the symptoms of people living with the condition. It rates people's moods from a 0 up to a 10. Those of the people here who aren't living with bipolar like myself, you'll only really experience probably what we call a balanced mood state. We use a mood tracker app to help people understand their moods. And I did this for a week and it was really boring. It was a really steady 5 all the way along the middle. So your best possible day, if you're not living with bipolar, you're never going to experience a high of more than a 6. And a low, if your worst possible day, of below a 4. But people with bipolar will experience a much bigger range of emotions. They'll experience very deep lows. People with bipolar have a very high risk of suicide, about 20 times the national average. We estimate that up to 1 in 5 people with bipolar will take their own life unless they get the support. It could account for at least 5% of all suicides in the UK, probably more than twice that. So a lot of what we talk about here today around bipolar specialist treatment support, this is core suicide prevention work as well. And it's really poignant day to day with obviously National Suicide Prevention Day that you'll come into this presentation. The other side of bipolar is the highs that people experience as well. There's a really interesting phase of bipolar called hypomania, where people are very productive, they've got a lot of energy. Consequently, many people with bipolar, because of this phase, can be really high achievers as well. But they don't get the support to manage the condition. That can quickly escalate into full-blown mania and then psychosis as well. And people experience very damaging and dangerous symptoms around hypersexual behavior. They put themselves in very vulnerable situations. We just did a recent report on that, where people have experienced horrific experiences with rape, having to have abortions as well, really difficult things that no one should have to go through, which is preventable if people were able to kind of get a diagnosis earlier as well, which we're going to come on to. But also, big issues of overspending. People take on lots of levels of unwanted debt as well. Lots of social problems that we experience as a society come about because of undiagnosed bipolar, and it's making a big contribution in terms of driving economic inequalities as well. A big part as well, psychosis. A lot of people with bipolar, about half people with bipolar have been hospitalised at some point with the condition, and about 50% report having been sectioned at some point. And the sectioning is a really harrowing experience for the doctors themselves who have to do it, but also for the patients, obviously, people living with the condition. No one would ever want to go through that. So anything we can do to reduce people, to help people in that middle range there, and that's what we do. When we talk about prevention around mental health, it needs to be specific and specialist. It's going to be different for everybody. A little bit of generalist support is not going to help people with bipolar stay well. You need targeted specialist support when people become slightly depressed and slightly manic to bring themselves back to the middle. And that's what we do as a charity, and that's what the specialist services you're going to hear from today do, from a clinical side, from the psychologist, and also from the psychiatrist perspective as well. I want to warm you all up. Where's everyone feeling on the mood scale right now? I can ask this question because we do have some trained professionals here. So if anyone is really low or really high, we can support you in that. Anyone experiencing a 5? That's good. Steady eddies. Anyone a 6? Any 6s? Anyone optimistic? Yes, we can do it. And anyone experiencing a 4, slightly down? It's difficult subject matter, so a couple of 4s there as well. There we go. Then my audience participation. I don't need to worry about putting your hand up for anything else. Within your trust and your organisations, you've got a lot of pressure. People say, we've got no money, and that's completely true. The NHS has no money. It's never going to have enough money, is it? Because the potential demand for health service is going to be is unlimited. You can spend 100% of your GDP on healthcare and still only touch the sides of what's possible. So we thought it was really important. We knew that specialist treatment worked, so that was our hypothesis. We thought it was really important to work with the leading academics and to build up a really solid evidence base on this. So as part of that, we established a bipolar commission, which was modelled on the schizophrenia commission. And we got the leading universities and academic psychiatrists involved, but also really important to get people with lived experience. So we did a series of surveys, over 7,000 responses. People with bipolar, you'll learn, love taking surveys. It's one of the key things they love, very, very passionate about. So we had over 7,000 responses. So probably at a conservative estimate, about 3,000 or 4,000 people with lived experience took part in this. And we also talked to lots of experts in the field. So what we're going to talk about today is based on a really good, solid evidence base. Also, really importantly, working with frontline staff on the NHS. The NHS is in a big mess at the moment. It's in a big mess because of COVID. It's in a big mess because of long-term underfunding. But it's also in a big mess because it's made some bad commissioning decisions as well, especially around mental health. And it needs to do things differently. And we're really privileged to work with a large number of NHS services who commission a lot of our services in our self-management courses. And it means it keeps us real and grounded when we do these presentations. We know how hard it is for the trust at the moment, and we're here to find solutions. And we're really privileged to work with some NHS trusts here today, and also some here that aren't able to be here today, like Oxford Health and Torbay in the South East as well. So there's a growing partnership and movement across the NHS to be able to fix this. It wouldn't be a conference about plugging your own services, and really proud of our peer support services. Been a lot of progress in the last few years making the case for peer support. There are 2 experts on bipolar, those living with the condition, and then the clinicians as well who are prescribing and delivering a lot of the treatments as well. Peer support is really effective. So this is from our evaluation. Peer support can take lots of different formats. We do support groups. We've got an e-community. We've got a callback service. We also do kind of one-to-one support. And then we've got our self-management courses as well, which have about 10, 20 people going on them, just learning the basics of bipolar. And we get about people coming through them, about 38% of them at the start of the course and through our services say they're staying well. And that goes up to 74%. So big reductions in people experiencing suicide ideation and also people experiencing mania as well. The beauty of peer support is it takes people's lived experience of living with a condition and it gives that self-worth as well. It gives that a value because you're able to use that experience to help other people. Everyone's bipolar is slightly different and everyone has a little piece of the jigsaw. So to be able to come together, you're able to then learn a bit more about the condition and to be able to support each other as well. It's a lifelong condition. A lot of the interventions, the changes people need to put in place, you have to take medication. Lithium is very effective for bipolar, but there's also other medications. Talking phrases are very effective, we're going to hear about it. But it's a lifelong condition, which means people need to kind of constantly work on managing it. If you know other people with the condition who are going through the same things as you, that makes life a million times easier because you know you're not doing it alone, that you're part of a supportive community that's going through a similar battle themselves. So it's really important that you've got peer support there. But also, peer support does not work by itself. You need to have statutory services to be able to support that. You need to have psychiatrists, you need to have clinical psychologists to be part of a care package, which is not massively expensive. Some of the cost for this, we're looking at a couple of £1,000s a year, which is significantly lower than a lot of the money which is spent on people being hospitalised, but also the cost to the welfare system as well, which is absolutely enormous for getting it wrong. And then not to mention, obviously, the enormous loss of life as well when we get this wrong. So why should we prioritise a specialist care pathway for bipolar when every other condition is shouting about it as well? Well, the obvious thing is that there's a huge number of people. There's well over 1 million people living with bipolar in the UK. And that stat really scares people. You go to a commissioner and they go, wow, there's 1 million people. That's like tens of thousands of people, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people in my area. If I start providing special services for them, then I'm stuffed. It's going to cost us millions. Well, you're already spending the money on it. You're just not spending it efficiently at the moment. You're spending on hospital beds. You're spending on other specialist treatment that doesn't work. So people are treating people with bipolar just not well. And also, it is a condition that's probably going up in the foreseeable future as well. This is from the APMS, the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity Study. Big dollops of salt needs to go with this because the tool they used to assess people with bipolar was the mood disorder questionnaire. Lots of false positives for young people and false negatives for old people. Obviously, people with bipolar die about, tragically, 10 to 15 years younger as well. But it's quite astonishing that 16 to 24-year-olds were about 6 times more likely to screen positive to 65 to 74-year-olds. So if I was a betting person, I'd say that probably the prevalence of bipolar is going up within society, and there's lots of reasons why that's the case. The study's coming, the update's coming out in the next year, 2 years, so we'll find out whether this is a cohort or a screening tool which is causing this, but it certainly is a cause for concern. And the second reason, why might bipolar be going up? Well, this is around the triggers for bipolar, and this is really critical for understanding why specialist care for bipolar is really important and why a generic treatment model for the condition just doesn't work. This is over 2,000 people with bipolar. We asked them what was the biggest triggers for the condition and for your different episodes. And the number one trigger that came up for bipolar was sleep. When we talk about public health, lots of stuff about exercise and diet, that's really important. It helps people with bipolar. But how often do we talk about sleep as being a public health crisis? Sleep is probably the number one thing that could help people with all mental health conditions, not just bipolar. But for bipolar, it's exactly the same as one of my friends, he has Raynaud's disease, and he went to the doctor and said, you shouldn't smoke. And he said, oh, your fingers are going to fall off. And he said, all right, okay. And he said, no, really, literally, your fingers are going to fall off. It's really serious. And he was like, that woke him up, and he thought, gosh, I need to do something about this. Bipolar, exactly the same for sleep. It is that critical in terms of keeping people well. 7 to 8 hours sleep, and it doesn't cost anything, but it requires some lifestyle changes, and people need to be able to know that that is fundamentally important. I can go a couple of weeks or a couple of days with not getting 7 or 8 hours sleep. I don't feel great when I miss sleep, but it's not gonna mean I get fundamentally unwell if I don't get that. But for people with bipolar, it is literally the difference of life and death. So we need to get that message out for people. A lot of the other triggers for bipolar, some of them are very obvious that a lot of the mental health services will be geared up with. Bereavement and trauma is a big trigger for bipolar. That's up there. But antidepressants, that was the second biggest trigger now. The data on this is the academic data says that the antidepressants do not trigger or cause bipolar. But our community certainly report that it either doesn't work or it makes the condition work and aggravates symptoms. And that's the first line of defense against depression. So most of the people with bipolar, when they first go to the doctor about their symptoms, will go with a depression and they're prescribed an antidepressant. They either don't work or they're going to make it worse. So this is something we need to get right. But then there's lots of counterintuitive things that cause bipolar as well to get worse. I think it's Denzel Washington says the devil comes for you at your highest moment. A lot of things that trigger bipolar episodes are things that mental health services would assume were a good thing. Starting a new job, that can be a trigger for people with bipolar. All these into-work schemes are going at the moment that you need to get people into work, you need to get people into work. Work can be a big help, but if you're starting and leaving a job, that is a massive trigger for people. That's as big a trigger is bereavement. What support do we provide to people with mental health conditions to get into work, to help them over that process? Also, lots of misconceptions as well, a lot of stigma. Substance misuse was one of the lowest triggers reported in terms of bipolar episodes. I'm being told, even now with this elongated timescale, I need to kind of speed up. So it's really important we get we do specialist treatment to get the detail right on this. The burden of mental illness for bipolar is also enormous. This is the Mental Health Foundation found this. 17% of the total burden of mental illness. Why is it that we've got specialist care pathway for depression and for schizophrenia and not bipolar? Even though the burden of mental illness is almost twice as high for schizophrenia psychosis. The cost of the NHS is at least £1 billion for relapses for bipolar alone. It's probably twice that when you include people who are not diagnosed. So we need to be able to, so in terms of the level of need, bipolar definitely needs to be up there in terms of specialist care pathway. Fundamentally, people need a diagnosis as well. So it takes an astonishing 9.5 years to get a diagnosis. Imagine that for cancer and diabetes. Imagine if someone with cancer had to wait until they were so sick they had to get hospitalized for cancer before getting a diagnosis. We just simply wouldn't accept it. But somehow for bipolar, we say that that's okay. We say it's too difficult. It's totally unacceptable it takes 9.5 years. That's something that needs to get fixed. The delay to diagnosis is caused because people aren't aware of the symptoms and then clinicians themselves aren't confident in diagnosing. And a lot of the charity sector lets the NHS off the hook on that. They say it's too difficult, that you're going to stigmatise people for the condition, and that's not true. People with bipolar overwhelmingly say diagnosis is helpful, and only 2.6% said that the delay was because they said they wanted to delay it, that the patient themselves said they weren't sure about whether they wanted to get a diagnosis for bipolar. So it's a system that's failing people. And that has consequences even on diagnosis. 44% of people said they attempted suicide because of the delay when they had to wait for more than 10 years, which is they're about the average. That compared to just below 25% of those who got a speedy diagnosis within 0 to 2 years. So just speeding up the diagnosis of bipolar would have an automatic benefit in terms of being able to reduce suicides. And what do patients want? We say that the NHS is supposed to be driven by patient needs. We're pragmatic. Doctors are fundamental to the NHS and obviously the clinicians and nurses and all the support staff. So we ask them, what do you want? not what the NHS, not what the policymakers want. The patients and the doctors overwhelmingly said their preferred care model was for the psychiatrist being the main point of call for the person with bipolar. Only 16.8% said the GP, which is currently the model that the NHS prescribes. And overwhelmingly, what doctors and patients want is continuity of care. That's more important than access and more important than the choice of clinician. It's about building long-term relationships between clinicians and the patient to be able to manage a condition. Trust is so important for bipolar, and that can save so much time and money as well. So anything the NHS does around retention, that's going to help people with bipolar as well. So just to finish up before I hand over to Eve, episodic care model for bipolar just isn't working. It's too expensive. It's resulting in about 6 out of 10 people with bipolar getting no treatment for the condition at all. And it's resulting in 1 in 10 people with bipolar attempting to take their lives every 6 months. We know we can do much better. And now we're going to hear from Eve, who's going to talk about the importance of diagnosis from a lived experience perspective. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'd just like to speak a little bit about, thanks Simon, about my experience of getting a diagnosis and the need for specialist care with bipolar. So I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 19, so I was incredibly lucky in the scheme of things compared to lots of other people in terms of that 9.5 year delay to diagnosis. And my journey to diagnosis was one that we hear constantly as a charity, and I'm sure our psychiatrists here and psychologists will agree that it's a story like as old as time in terms of bipolar. So when I was around 12, I started experiencing episodes of depression. These were ongoing and persistent as well. They were kind of like occupied and dominated my youth and my growing up. And those periods of depression kind of escalated, and I started self-harming, and I struggled in school, I struggled socially, and this was persistent. And when I hit about 15, my parents were obviously relatively concerned, and then I was sent to my kind of local GP, prescribed antidepressants. And when I was prescribed antidepressants, as we spoke about there, I started then experiencing these first episodes of kind of like highs. So on that scale, they were kind of on the 6, 7, and this was obviously something that the feeling of that feeling is actually quite a nice feeling. When it's in that 6, 7 level, you don't necessarily go to a doctor and say, hi, I'm experiencing this really great feeling, I'm really productive, they just obviously turn you away and be like, deal with it. So you don't get any help for that. But those antidepressants had obviously triggered something within my brain. There's obviously a predisposition, I think probably genetic, that has caused that to happen. When I went to university, again, another huge trigger for lots of people, I then started experiencing even more severe episodes of these kind of depressive and highs, and they started to just go and veer higher into that mood scale and lower into the mood scale. So my time at university was incredibly fragmented for that first year, and I went to Amsterdam that Christmas and did, obviously, as every 18-year-old does in Amsterdam, and ended up having this kind of like quasi-psychotic episode where I felt like I was in a video game and I had to commit suicide to be out of the video game. And it's incredibly traumatic. It was incredibly difficult. And following that, had lots of kind of paranoia that lingered with me for a while. It started to really impact my studies again. And it wasn't until it was the summer of second year, so a while later. During this time as well, I'd gone to lots of different streams and avenues to try and seek help, because I knew that I wasn't just depressed. I knew there was obviously something more at play, and I had that insight and the ability to know that. And those avenue streams were the same streams that lots of people take with bipolar. It's A&E, it's your GP again and again, saying, I don't think there's something right here. And often you felt like you were battered away. It took until I got to crisis that I got any help, and even then it was still private. So I was in my second year of university. I was interning at the Sunday Times, and I was had this actual kind of psychotic episode where I thought that everyone outside was in this like network out to get me, and that people were on the phone talking about me, and that people were aliens and all this sort of like mental stuff that it obviously had escalated to a point where, and it clearly wasn't drug induced, it was obviously kind of, in this case, organic, that the people around me realised I needed help. So I eventually got a diagnosis, and eventually ever since then I've been really lucky, and I've had periods of ups and downs, but I was able to be given the support, the medication, which is an incredibly important thing. I know that because when I'm not on medication, I'm not particularly good, or I get ill again. And also therapies, and I was also lucky enough later to go through early intervention in psychosis, which is a specialist care pathway, but unfortunately the kind of let up of that is that you don't get any bipolar specific care on that. And I always say half of managing bipolar is its medication, and the other half of it is undoubtedly about managing those triggers and that self-care, understanding that it is sleep that actually triggers it, because who would think that not being able to sleep would cause something so, serious, or avoiding drugs, or avoiding all these things that are just a key part of managing the condition. It's so imperative that you know about them in order to be able to properly ensure that you do not lapse again. And that episodic care model otherwise just continues, even post-diagnosis for lots of people. And there needs to be a structure in place whereby people are able to learn about the condition and allow themselves to be able to maintain that care. So the duty is on both the healthcare professional and on the individual to make sure and ensure that they stay well and stay healthy. I always maintain that, my diagnosis and my journey through specialist care, my journey of educating myself on the condition has allowed me to, not just kind of like survive with bipolar, but also it has enabled me to kind of thrive with it. And I now work for Bipolar UK, working in the policy team and trying to help impact and try and influence in terms of specialist care. So that's kind of my pitch in terms of why specialist care is so important. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Eve. Real honour now to bring up Dr. Elizabeth Newton, who's a
Lizzie's fine.
Clinical psychologist. There you go.
Okay. So I'm Lizzie Newton. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I run a specialist bipolar service for people with bipolar in Birmingham, and it's just psychological therapies. I think one of the only psychological therapy service, particularly for bipolar in the UK, actually. So I just want to bring your attention to something that Eve said. Medication is really, really helpful for bipolar, and when you ask people with bipolar, have you been offered medication, about 100% of people will say yes. If you ask people, have you been offered any psychological intervention for your condition, 15% of people will have been offered psychological intervention. So we are really, as a health providers, missing a trick here, I would say. So we know that psychological therapies are evidence-based and they're effective. So CBT, family interventions, interpersonal couples therapy for depression, and psychoeducation, which Bipolar UK provide, are not only evidence-based, but they're recommended by NICE. They improve outcomes as an adjunct to medication. People have less frequent relapses. They are hospitalised less frequently, and their symptoms improve. So episodes of depression are easier to manage. The manic highs are better managed, and anxiety gets better. But we know that people just aren't getting the clinical care that they need in terms of psychological interventions. And from my personal perspective, when I think about that, I think about, well, why do you think that might be? Well, there's definitely not enough psychological therapies in the NHS across the board. But even those people that are psychological therapists might not be particularly trained in what Simon was saying, in those specialist care pathways and what the interventions are for people with bipolar disorder. You're all here because it's the long-term plan conference, and actually the long-term plan and the community transformation in mental health is really got its eyes on improving access to psychological therapies for people with bipolar disorder as one of the 5 conditions that they've chosen. But it's still not going up very quickly, and I know that because I sit on the expert advisory group for that improvement in access to psychological interventions. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what we do in Birmingham, and I'm going to do that actually in the words of our service users who have collaborated to make a really nice animation, which I hope you're going to enjoy, to tell you about the care that we provide. But basically it's a 13-week CBT group. We can provide that online or face-to-face, depending on service user choice. And then they have one-to-one sessions, which are really all about those stress triggers, thinking about individualising those, what keeps people well, fit and healthy. And really, it's about self-management. The beauty, I think, of Mood on Track is it doesn't rely solely on psychological therapists or people like myself to run it. So we can train any core mental health practitioner up in 5 days to run this course for their service users. They don't need any specialist supervision, just the psychological therapists that are already in their service, and they could roll this out in their area. I was advised that...
Mood on Track
here we go.
is a psychological intervention program for people experiencing mood changes associated with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder or cyclothymia. This is Mia. She's waiting for an appointment with her consultant psychiatrist. Last year, Mia experienced some extreme mood swings.
Good morning. Oh, wonderful. 2, please. No, 3. Hello, handsome. Ha! Food.
Moods that were beyond her usual.
When's it ready, Mum? I'm hungry.
I'm making us a feast. It's going to be amazing.
Could we just have something simple? I don't know what I can do to help you.
I don't want to see anyone or be seen. They'd be better off without me.
Eventually, Mia got some help. She spent a short time in hospital and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
I never want to feel like that again.
Mia's psychiatrist tells Mia about the Mood on Track program.
So it can really help you to understand and manage your mood swings better.
I actually feel okay these days since starting the prescription.
Medication is helpful, but it's also important to have some psychological treatment.
Okay, thanks. I'll have a think about it.
Just let me know if you'd like a referral.
I expect there's a long wait for this. And anyway, I really do feel fine these days. I'll have a look at this later.
Meanwhile, Mia carries on with her life. Or tries to.
Oh. Oh, I need to do something. I can't go through what happened again. Okay, this sounds a bit different to anything I've done before. It would be nice not to feel so alone in this. Hi, I'm calling about Mood on Track.
After speaking with her psychiatrist, the next step is an initial appointment with a Mood on Track clinician. During this meeting, Mia gets to talk about her experiences.
Sorry, I'm not explaining very well.
Don't worry, Mair. You're doing fine. It's not an exam. You don't need to pass anything today to get on the course. Initially, you'll attend group cognitive behaviour therapy sessions alongside people with similar experiences. This will be followed by individual appointments. And with your clinician, you will create a personalised staying well plan, and you can choose to have these sessions either in person or online.
Mia decides she'll give it a go.
Finally, something that might work. So that course is starting tomorrow. I'll miss Sue's birthday lunch. I'm not sure I need it, to be honest. I'm feeling so much better right now.
Yeah, but what about when you're not feeling so well?
Also, what sort of people will be there?
Why don't you just go for a couple of sessions? You can always stop if it's not your cup of tea.
Okay, I will. Here we go then. Ooh, lots of new people to meet.
Good to see you today. Would you like something to drink? Grab a chair. There's a course manual on the free ones.
Oh, you can't even tell anyone here has bipolar. I think this is going to be all right.
The group meets Alan, who has already completed the program.
6 months ago, I was sat where you are, wondering what on earth is this, and how could talking to a bunch of strangers possibly help me?
He shares his experiences, how he's learned to handle things using his staying well plan.
It's my absolute rock. Keep it by my bedside table.
Mia found that being in a group of people with shared, similar experiences felt safe and non-judgmental.
I got obsessed with the electric guitar. Bought all the kit, lessons, accessories. Haven't played it since.
That sounds like me and my fixation with plants.
Having a space to express openly took away some of the shame they had all been experiencing.
How's your week going, Mia?
Honestly, I nearly didn't come today. I've got loads to do at home. It takes an hour to get here. I'm not sure I'm getting anywhere.
I know that feeling.
I always think that. Even if it's just one thing stays with me from a session, it's worth it.
Oh yeah, like that breathing exercise we learned.
Oh yeah.
Stick with it, Mia. It's worth it, even if you can't see it now.
Mood on Track builds a support system between peers, clinicians, and yourself. After attending the group for several weeks, Mia begins one-on-one sessions with a clinician, working together to create her own personal staying well plan, a toolkit of skills that Mia can put to use. From spotting the signs of a mood change before things get bad, to knowing what activities help her when she feels hypomanic or low.
Hello, Mia.
Hi.
As Mia gains confidence in handling her bipolar disorder, she feels more comfortable talking to other people about it too.
And I haven't been in hospital since.
Helping them understand it and breaking down the stigma. Even though the program is now finished, Mia still feels supported. When episodes do occur, Mia finds they are much shorter. She still has high and low moods, but knows how to manage them better and can seek support when she needs it. Backed up by her staying well plan, she feels confident about her ability to make decisions, manage her mood, and lead a more balanced, happier life.
So thanks for your attention and watching that. I'm really pleased with that, and just like to thank the service users and the staff who both wrote it and actually voiced all the characters in that. But just to finish here with some of the improvements and the changes that we see after the Mood on Track course, be it online or face-to-face. So the bottom is our bipolar recovery questionnaire, and that's actually taken from an unpublished piece of research that we're just about to send off for publication of our digital Mood on Track programme, which shows that there is significant improvements both after the CBT group but also after the one-to-one staying well planning work. And during the waiting period, which is baseline to start, you can see that actually people actually get a little bit worse. That's not a significant change, but that's the way that goes. But what service users tell us, both in the online evaluation and also the paper by Steve Jones there, which was published in 2018, which is about our face-to-face intervention, that actually people improve in recovery, their symptoms improve, they feel better able to self-manage, more confident, more able to articulate and talk about their difficulties to their doctors and support systems so they can ask for help when they need it. And importantly, that they've met a group of peers who can support themselves and one another throughout as well. In terms of digital offer, obviously we started doing that during COVID, and we would say we never thought that we would do digital therapy, but actually it has got additional benefits in terms of inclusion and reaching people that really need the help. Some people don't want to come to a clinic, they don't want to be associated with mental health services, so actually just switching on your computer on a day is really easy to do. The other thing is that actually lots of people with bipolar disorder have comorbid conditions, so they might have autism or a physical health condition. We've had people who are blind attend the programme, and sometimes it's easier to do that on technology than it is face-to-face. We also have many people who are working full-time or who perhaps have got childcare responsibilities, and again, flick of a button, they can attend the sessions. And the other thing we find is obviously people, bipolar disorder mood is variable. Sometimes you might not feel like getting up and travelling for an hour to get to a face-to-face session, but you can just switch on the computer, and your peers all know that you might be having a bad day. We do a check-in at the beginning. People don't mind that. And you can see here that actually 11 out of 13 group sessions were attended in our last evaluation, which actually in psychological therapy is pretty much unheard of when you usually get about 50% dropout rates in some psychological therapies. So I think that's really speaks for itself. And then what people want to know about cost saving. What can this do for our health economy? What can it do for people? How can it get people back to work? But we know that the Steve Jones paper suggests that 6 days for each person that attends the course is reduced in terms of actually hospital days per person per year. Now, that might not seem a huge amount, but if you then cost that, and I'm not a health economist, so I like to step back at this point and give a bit of a warning about that. But actually, if you take the average cost of a hospital bed, and I don't mean PQ, I mean just a normal hospital bed in Birmingham, for each person on the course, that saves £60,000 each year. And that's cumulative, because once you've learned the self-management strategies, that's not going to go away. That's with you year on year on year. I've got a tiny service. We've only got 5 clinicians working in it. Our costs are £708,000 a year. We run 9 programmes a year, as well as other things at the moment. So in terms of new costs, that's £540,000 just in hospital beds each year. And so that means actually, if you set up a new service similar to ours, that within 2 years you could easily be saving £1.5 million in terms of hospital bed use and crisis. And that's good for the health economy, but it's incredibly important for our service users, because the last thing they want is to be in hospital or their lives to be interrupted, not being able to go to work and get on with the things that we all value and want to do. And so that's much more important actually than the cost itself, is for people actually staying well with bipolar disorder. And with that, I'm going to hand over to other people to tell you all about the diagnosis early on.
Thanks, Lizzie. That was brilliant. I'm going to bring up Dr. Aditya Sharma, who's one of the leading child psychiatrists. We've got Barry as well, who's a team leader. So we're going to be talking about the amazing service up in Newcastle. There we go.
Thanks, Simon. Barry and I are going to do a double act. We're going to try and do this. We've not done it before. Thank you, Simon, Eve, and of course, Lizzie, for setting the scene. So this will be the last talk. We run the only national specialist adolescent mood disorders service, and we're here to make a case for the NHS funding a network of paediatric specialist tertiary services that help young people living with and their families living with mood disorders. So we hope we can convince you, and we hope that you can then cascade that to ICBs, CCGs, etc. I think it's a travesty, personally. Sorry, I'm quite disinhibited for a psychiatrist, a consultant, so I swear a lot. I think it's shitty. I think it's unacceptable that we have to wait 9.5 years for a diagnosis of bipolar. I started training in psychiatry in 1999, and we had the Stanley Foundation report at the time. This was a large multi-center research report that came out in the late 90s, and they had various centers across Europe, the US and Canada. And at that time, the average delay in diagnosis of bipolar was 10 to 12 years. Now, you've just heard from Simon, the Bipolar Commission that Bipolar UK led on, 24 years later, and it's only gone down to 9.5 years. We have a cancer turnaround target of 2 weeks. How is it acceptable for any disorder? I'm not trying to say bipolar is special, but how is it acceptable that a disorder is allowed to go on for 9.5 years? Because that impacts not just on the individual, but every system that they're a part of. And Barry and I work with young people. Can you imagine being 15, cycling, trying to go speak to your GP, seeing a different GP each time, and I'm not having a go at my primary care colleagues. They do a phenomenal job. They're overrun, overworked. They have 3 minutes to see somebody. And as Eve said, you go see the GP when you're unwell, you're sad. You're not going to go and see them and say, well, hey, I feel great, the world's awesome. You're not going to go and do that. And then you're put on antidepressants. So we really, really need to do more work to educate people about the risk factors. Antidepressants, by the way, are not all bad. There is a proportion of people that need them, but we need to be very careful in certain high-risk situations. what we're going to talk about is a little bit about the risks and burden associated with bipolar today, some of which, Simon and Eve have already talked about, both from the Bipolar Commission and their work with Bipolar UK and the lived experience. But just to add to that, tell you a little bit about our service and its benefits, both in terms of cost effectiveness, because this is an NHS conference. We have to make, it's not just about services that are clinically effective, but they also have to make a benefit to the NHS. So this was staggering. I looked these figures up, and it's really quite sad that the WHO Mental Health Survey has shown that bipolar disorder is the second most common reason for taking days off work. This includes every single condition, including road traffic accidents. This is not just mental health, by the way. It's one of the major causes for disability amongst young people, and is the leading cause of completed suicide between 16 to 24-year-olds. Anorexia nervosa has higher mortality, but it's not due to suicide, if that makes sense. Yeah? So I'm not trying to pitch one disorder against the other, just trying to highlight and make a case for why it's so important that we treat bipolar across the life course, but we have this amazing opportunity early on in the course of the illness to intervene for children and adolescents. That is where there is the greatest unmet need. CAMS is, for those of you that are not familiar with CAMS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, we are the Cinderella of Cinderellas. Mental health services are the Cinderellas of health, and child services are the forgotten Cinderellas of the Cinderellas. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize. I think it's unacceptable. I'm not one of those shrinking violet psychiatrists who will say, oh, well, it'll get better. Bloody won't get better. We've got to activate and agitate. It's really, really sad that 1 out of 10 patients with bipolar end their life by completed suicide. That's staggering. And 1 out of 50 people are living with this condition, most undiagnosed. Yeah? These figures are staggering. And this is also combined with the elevated mortality rate. So unfortunately, we don't have the best treatments always pharmacologically. You heard Eve talk about 50%. Actually, medication, only improves 35 to 40% of the illness, but it's the single most important ingredient. So I'm not trying to do myself out of a job as a psychiatrist, but I'm also trying to be realistic. Medication is very important, but medication has lots and lots of side effects. And that's another problem with the episodic care model that Simon spoke about. I can still remember going to the big bipolar disorders conference in Pittsburgh in 2006. Unfortunately, I was late for the formal meal, so all the seats were taken, and I sat with the service users. And I thought that was bloody amazing, because I got to chat with them and I got to understand what it means to live with this condition. I was a baby doctor. I had just started off my journey as a registrar. And it left an indelible mark on me, because you know what they said to me? They said, oh, you're from England. You've got the amazing NHS. We don't get continuity of care. Every single patient there had health insurance cover till they had their first manic episode. The moment they had their manic episode, their treatment was covered under health insurance, but then they lost their job. When they lost their job, they had no health insurance, and they swung from episode to episode. And they said to me, what will it take for our government to have a plan like yours, where there's continuity of care? I don't know what to say to them now in 2024, where most of mental health's moved on to episodic care. It's unacceptable. It doesn't work. What keeps people well is consistency and continuity of trusting their mental health professionals. Doesn't have to be their psychiatrist, doesn't have to be their psychologist. They just need to have faith. It's really hard to talk about these things. Why end SAMS? I'm going to hand over to Barry so you'll get a better respite from me, but I will come back, I promise, and hassle you more.
Thank you very much. So, NSAMS, National Specialist Adolescent Mood Disorder Service, based in Newcastle. We are a national service. As Addy said, we are the only service of its kind, which again is something that we are proud of, but also worries us, because we get referrals from all over the mainland and also Ireland and the Channel Islands, which we support people where we can, and that again is good, but local services could probably do more to do that work prior to getting to the point where they need something as specialist as ourselves. But yes, we're a specialist tertiary service where often we get referrals for young people when there are issues around diagnosis. Clinicians might be struggling. They may have tried, got things wrong, revisited, got a bit stuck, had disputes with parents, and eventually think they might need a second opinion, so they'll refer to us at that point. We also get involved where conditions might already have a diagnosis but might be very difficult to treat. These things, we are talking about, of the figures that we've heard today, we are talking about a very small percentage of people would maybe get a referral to our service, because really everybody else should be able to be supported within local services anyway. It's only those with added complexity that we would get really involved in. That's why you would think about needing a second opinion service for it, like speciality. So this is us. We explore, as it says there, mood disorder with complex presentations. Often co-occurring conditions, numerous different issues that people might have. People, as I say, come to us when they get really quite stuck. The referrals, as I mentioned, we take nationally. We've actually had a referral recently from the Republic of Ireland, which is, again, is an appropriate referral, because, again, in the Republic, they don't have services who can support people with this level of complexity. So we are currently exploring how we would be able to help over there as well. But as you can see by the stars, they're dotted all over the country. Again, something we're very proud of, but again highlights the fact that there are no other services to pick up on that small percentage of people who require that kind of level of support.
Thank you. We're very proud because a bit as you know, I think co-production and co-design is fundamental. It's key. We have got to get it right. We're all cash-strapped. We're close to being burnt out. And when you are like that, I think it's really important that you channel your resources in the right way. So our pathway has been co-designed and is kind of iteratively developed every year. We have a very experienced MDT. We definitely, it's not just a psychiatrist and a nurse. It did start like that many moons ago, but you know, we're a fully functioning MDT. And every assessment's very bespoke because every single patient's different and they present with complexity. And we are able to offer a lot of treatments that are beyond NICE guidelines, that are beyond BAP guidelines, and that are kind of sometimes off-label and off-license as well. Because, again, if the treatments that were licensed and recommended were to work, they've already been tried and exhausted before the kids come to our service. So we, of course, share that with the family. We tell them there's no guarantee. Our strapline is, we will get you better, just when and how long it'll take and how much better, we don't know. But we've always managed to get patients better. We try and keep that therapeutic optimism, but pace it right. It's not going to change overnight. Our average patient has spent between 6 to 9 months in an inpatient unit, has had about 12 different medications, perhaps a couple of psychotherapies. It's shocking, isn't it, Lizzie, that more psychotherapeutic interventions aren't tried in either individual, on its own or in conjunction with medication. And they've often also had treatments like ECT. We only see under 18 patients. Just to end very quickly, we thought we'd show you some work we did in terms of evaluating our service. These are rough and ready, and I'm sorry about the busyness of the slide, but this was until the end of 2022. We'd had 238 referrals, of which 72 got a diagnosis of unipolar depression, 84 bipolar disorder, and other categories. So I just want to again reassure you, not every kid who comes to us gets a diagnosis of a mood disorder. There are other conditions that present with mood issues, but that's not driven primarily by mood. And when they were depressed, only 5 were inpatient when referred, and 67 were outpatient. And if you stick with the bipolar ones, 7 were inpatient when referred, and 77 were outpatient. And what's really interesting here is that of the 77, during the course of our stay, only 3 patients required admission to hospital. We kept 74 out of the 77 patients at over 95% out of hospital. An inpatient CAMS bed costs anywhere between £1,000 a night, and if it's a PICU, probably about £2,000 a night. I'm sure there are people here who are more accurately informed. Our assessment costs a fraction of what it would cost to keep somebody in. And how is it beneficial for a young person to go into hospital, leave everything that's familiar, their parents, their family, and sometimes, of course, one of my colleagues, Professor Kapil Sale, did the Far Away from Home study. Kids are being admitted 200 miles away from where they live because we don't have children's inpatient units. So again, inpatient units are not the therapeutic milieu they used to be when I started off as a trainee. It's not the best place for anybody to be in, and it really should be the last resort. So I think, I know Simon might be wrapping up. Bipolar UK, I also happen to be for my sins because I'm so bloody passionate and stuck and just don't take no for an answer. Simon invited me to be on the board of Bipolar UK as the medical trustee. We're launching this campaign, #CouldItBeBipolar. And I'd like to leave you with that thought. There are young people. Bipolar starts between the age of 16 and 19. It's the peak age of onset. I'm not saying this. NICE guidelines are saying this. If you don't believe me, believe NICE. And the number of times we have kids and families in tears who'll call our service and say, we're told you can't have bipolar before 18. Nothing bloody changes the stroke of midnight hour on somebody's 18th birthday. All mental health disorders start in teenagers, apart from anxiety, which actually start in middle childhood. We need to recognize this. We need to act. We need to avoid delays. We need to avoid kids going into hospital. And then hopefully we reduce the burden on the NHS, the individuals, but also their families and carers. So just leave you with that. Pediatric bipolar is one of those rare conditions that made it to the cover of Time and Newsweek in 2006. Please, please, please advocate for us. And again, I think there is a risk, hopefully not, but you've heard the concerns about the gender dysphoria services for kids, etc. We need a network because networks provide consistency. They also provide people going rogue. They try and prevent that. And then more importantly, how is it fair that a child from Bristol or from Devon or Jersey has to take 2 flights to come and see us in Newcastle? I think we need a network. If this was happening with kids with cancer, there'd be an uproar, an outcry. Let's try and get an outcry for mental health. Thank you.